Welcome to the Personal Pension Radio Podcast, where you get unconventional insights into wealth building and retirement that actually work. Discover data-driven strategies and learn from a wealth of experience so that you can take your retirement to the next level. Now, here's your host. He was once bitten by a harbor seal, the income engineer, Kraig Strom.
I'm actually joined on the podcast today with Hillel Presser. Hello, Hillel.
Hey, how you doing today?
Awesome. How are things down in beautiful, sunny Florida?
Can't complain. Beautiful weather. A little hot in the summer, but sure beats the snow.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to definitely cover that on the interview today as far as how in the world you end up in Florida. I think I probably know it might be weather related. But for everybody listening, Hillel actually is the founder of the Presser Law Firm, and we're going to interview Hillel today about a topic that is extremely important to us here at Personal Pension Radio and in my practice, which is protection. Hillel helps his clients protect themselves from, it's funny, lawyers, creditors, foreclosures, et cetera, and I love this, that while many people can make you money and help you invest, few people actually know how to protect it. So we're going to get into that today with Hillel. But just a little housekeeping stuff. We are broadcasting from the 95th floor of the Personal Pension Radio Tower here in South Corona, California. And as it probably often is with where Hillel is, it's just almost always sunny. The only difference is we have more traffic.
Yeah. You know, I love California. You guys have the best weather and, great restaurants and great lifestyle. I always said, if I didn't live in Florida, it would be a place I'd consider. But I got to tell you, every time I come down there and I see that traffic, I can't wait to get out of there. I'm sorry, Kraig.
Oh, no, you know what? No worries at all. We actually had a traffic Armageddon yesterday that was just something happened on the local freeway here near my home, and my wife had to make what is geographically a 40-minute drive, and it took her an hour and 20 minutes to get on the freeway. It was unbelievable. So yeah, Southern California, it looks great on TV, but that's because they can edit out the traffic. So
that's funny.
Let's jump right in here. If those who have listened to the podcast, Personal Pension Radio is all about, it's focused on the idea of bringing together experts needed to help business owners and professionals and people in general protect their wealth and their lifestyle today and when they retire. The key to our conversation is it's more than just saving for retirement. You actually have to be able to get there and enjoy an income in retirement. And the big deal that we want to talk about today is, what if life throws you up a roadblock or a detour or hits you with a huge lawsuit that you weren't expecting? If it's not enough to have great retirement savings planning or great retirement income planning, if someone can come in and mess with your plan because you didn't have proper protection, then all is lost. So we want to make sure that we're not trapped building the business or saving for retirement and we forgot to close the garage door. If you understand the analogy there, you left the garage door open. You need to protect what you have, right? So Hillel's specialty as an attorney is just that, is protection. And I actually met Hillel's firm and his representative out here in Southern California, even though he's actually in Florida. I guess that means you are national and internationally famous, right?
I try. We have a nationwide practice. We have clients in almost every single state and different countries as well. And, we focus solely on asset protection, but we do asset protection both from a domestic and an international component, so covering all aspects of the globe.
Now, that's outstanding. Now, I understand that you were, as I learned about you and prepared for the interview, I understand that you actually, grew up in New York, in Rochester. Were you born in New York?
No, I was actually born in Miami. My father's a dermatologist, Mohs surgeon, and he was down here doing his residency and left when I was very young. I was about 2 years old, and I grew up my entire life in Rochester, New York. So, I was used to that cold weather and, the schools getting closed for the ice storm.
That's right. Snow days.
Yeah. After that, I made my way up to Syracuse University for my undergrad. I was in the School of Management, the business school there. I think I was actually the first student there to ever major in entrepreneurship. And then after that, I think I smartened up and I said, you know what, for law school, I'm going to head back down south to Florida. Did my law degree at Nova Southeastern University. Also actually taught some undergrad and graduate business law over at Lynn University, and also got my master's, my MBA at Lynn as well. So I've been in Florida now for a very long time, and it's a place I call home. And I try and make it back to Rochester when it's nice, which is about 1 day per year.
I thought it was an interesting connection that you and I have. That my mom actually spent a good deal of her childhood in Rochester. And
yeah, look, it's a great place. It's a great place for a family, a great place to bring up kids. But, man, it's cold. I think I remember 1 year it was May and it was snowing at Syracuse during graduation.
Woo. That is, I actually say that people tell me, because I speak very fondly of having grown up personally in Maine. So I speak very fondly of it. And folks will often say, well, why aren't you there right now? And I say, because I'm old enough. I was old enough when I left to remember all the things that I loved as a kid. And now I'm mature enough as an adult that I realized I'd never had to actually get up and go to work in a January blizzard. So there's something to be said for, being able to get up without sliding sideways down the road, right?
Fair enough.
Absolutely. So I love, actually, you shared this with me because we do like to actually have a motivational quote from our guests when we can. And I really loved your motivational quote. If you could share that with our audience, I think it's very perfect for today.
I have a lot of them, but when it comes to asset protection, what I try and tell all my clients is, you spend an entire lifetime trying to make money, whether it's to live a better life, give it to the kids, give it to your favorite charity. But people really don't spend time protecting it. And, you certainly don't want to be retired backing out of your driveway and, God forbid, hit a bicyclist, or, maybe you have a rental property, someone slips and falls and, injures themselves and, sues you for everything you own. Or
right.
maybe it's just a kid. Maybe it's even out of your reach. Maybe you have a child, driving a car that's titled to your name, they get in an accident and you get sued because you own the car. So what I tell my clients is, for every 60 minutes you spend making money, spend 60 seconds thinking about how to protect it.
Now, that is such a perfect quote. I am absolutely going to use that because it is, and I will credit the proper source, of course, for liability and legal reasons. No.
Don't worry, I won't sue you.
No, I think it's a fantastic quote that I've often said here and on this podcast and with clients, that we spend more time planning our vacation than we do our financial future. And the piece that you focus on in the area of protection is something that I'm very passionate about. How did you end up in law with this kind of a focus? Because a law practice can span, everything from international law, patent law, and I talked to an attorney 2 weeks ago who specializes almost entirely in water.
Yeah, as far back as I could remember, if you would ask me when I was 10 years old what I was going to be, I would have told you hands down I was going to be an attorney. And it probably had something to do with the fact that at that point I was very close with my uncle, and my uncle was one of the first personal injury attorneys, in fact, to ever advertise on TV. So every time I had a vacation, every time I had a summer break, I'd go work in his office.
Oh.
And I'd answer phones and stuff envelopes and sign up clients. And if you asked me back then, I probably would have told you I was going to be a personal injury attorney because, that's what I was familiar with. As I went down, I met somebody, a mentor to me, who practiced in the field of asset protection. And that was really the first I'd ever heard of it. Because while there might be 1,000 personal injury attorneys in every city, and there might be 1,000 criminal attorneys in every city, and 1,000 real estate attorneys in every city, there's not many people in the entire country that solely practice asset protection. And I said to myself, you know what? This is pretty cool. I'm the lawyer who hates lawyers. And, people work so hard to make money, I thought it would be pretty neat to try and help them protect it from all those frivolous lawsuits out there. So as soon as I caught wind of it, I read every article I could. I read every book I could. I studied it. This was even during law school. And then when I got out, I did as much as I could. I teamed up with my mentor. We ended up actually becoming 50-50 partners in the practice. Unfortunately, he passed away back in 2010. He was much older than me, but I just thought it was so great to help all these hardworking people, whether they're business owners or school teachers or athletes or even people who received money in an inheritance or divorce, protect what they worked so hard to obtain. Because unfortunately, they make it so easy and inexpensive, if not free, to sue anybody. But they make it so difficult and expensive to defend yourself. So just trying to balance out those scales of justice.
I completely understand. We here in California, we like to say that we are number one. We're number one with the highest taxes, and most especially, let's see, earlier this year we were number one most likely place to be audited, and then I think we still top the list of the most litigious state in the union. So we're just number one in so many great things.
Did you guys get a prize for that?
Oh, yeah, you get a prize. It's called a lawsuit from just anyone who might want to send it to you. Right?
Hey, don't worry. They'll only keep you in court on average for 5 to 6 years, and hey, even if you beat them, maybe you'll only spend $100,000 in legal fees.
No big deal, right? You just have to sell a kidney and work 4 jobs. You'll be fine. So I have to say, I have to ask this question: that as you went into this focus, though, because you've actually been a very busy author. For those who have listened to the podcast and those who are new, you'll know that there's going to be extensive show notes. We're going to have links to Hillel's website, his books. We actually have a really cool book giveaway offer, so don't miss that at the end of the podcast. But did you find, as you started to focus on this and as you went out into the world looking for information, did you find that there was that gap there, that the information about asset protection, because it just wasn't as sexy as perhaps the litigious side of the law, did you find there was a gap in the knowledge and the information?
Without a doubt. And, I think it takes us back to law school. In law school, they have a class on real estate law. They have a class on criminal law. They have a class on torts, which is personal injury. And hence why there's probably thousands of attorneys in every city in those categories. There's no class on asset protection. I think and hope that one day there will be. So, while it's great because it's such a niche, there might be, only a couple hundred guys in the country that really claim to do it. But, there's really about 5 or 10 Maine attorneys like myself, that really handle most of the asset protection cases throughout the country. I think and I hope that'll change. People always say, well, why would you want that to change? It's such a great niche that you have. And I want it to change because you have to educate the clients. And, unfortunately, what I see a lot of the time is that a client will contact me after they've been sued, after there's a judgment against them, which a lot of times, and most of the time is too late. Just like somebody buys car insurance before the accident or life insurance before they pass away, asset protection planning has to be done proactively. So unfortunately, since there's a lack of information, a lot of people don't know asset protection even exists until it's too late. So, I travel the country, I speak all over the country, maybe, 30, 40, 50 times a year easily. I write books. I try and get the educational information out there just so people can educate themselves. And even if they don't do anything, at least they know, hey, there are options out there.
Yeah, see, that's the key that you just said there. The actual execution, the actual implementation of something when it comes to protection it's not always a difficult thing. There's something that you say very specifically in your book. This will be actually, I'm referencing Financial Self-Defense. Financial Self-Defense, fantastic book, extremely comprehensive. Got to read it. You can get it in an offer that we're going to have at the end of the podcast. But you talk about simplify. Simple can be beautiful, is what you said. Talk to that a bit as far as what you mean by that.
Well, I'm a couple different levels. I always tell my clients, keep everything simple, keep everything cost effective. someone will go, buy my book on Amazon, and they'll call me and they'll tell me they need some crazy, expensive plan. They want a personal international asset protection Swiss hybrid trust that owns an entity international asset protection LLC. And, I'll literally have to spend an hour unselling them. Whenever you put an asset protection plan together, you want to keep it as simple and inexpensive as possible. Look, as your personal assets grow, your plan can grow. As your business assets grow, your plan can grow. Most importantly, as your education grows, your plan can grow. But if you don't understand every single thing that you're doing, you shouldn't do it. And it's not just about keeping it simple and inexpensive. It's about making it comfortable for you. The whole point of an asset protection plan is so you can go to bed at night, rest assured that, God forbid, if something happens tomorrow, you and your family, won't be put out, and you'll be able to live the same financial lifestyle that you currently are living. If you don't feel comfortable with your plan, or if it's not simple enough to understand and it keeps you up at night, you shouldn't do it. So although your assets might warrant the plan, I would say do less and feel comfortable with what you're doing and understand what you're doing. Keep it simple. And as time goes on and you understand more and, you grow personally and business-wise, then you can add to the plan.
I think that's great advice. I mean, it's outstanding advice. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, when I've met new and prospective clients, and I asked them, what kind of planning do you have in place, and describe your legal protection planning. They say that there was a lot of boxes on the screen when they showed it to us, and we just added a couple more boxes, and every one of the boxes was a new something or other, some legal wrangling. And not that I disagree with the validity of, like you just said earlier, you rattled off, for example, a Swiss protection trust, et cetera. I mean, there's clearly a reason for complicated or comprehensive planning, but if you can't explain it, it's hard to rationalize.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. First of all, there's no one-size-fits-all. There's no cookie-cutter asset protection. Everybody needs an individualized and customized and tailored plan, that works for their assets, because what works for you might not work for me. And on top of that, you always need to do a cost-benefit analysis. And I'll just take a couple minutes and give you an example.
Oh, thank you.
Whenever you own a piece of real estate, you should never own it in your personal name. And that's for two reasons. If you own the piece of real estate in your personal name, well, if you get sued, somebody can take that piece of real estate. Number two, if somebody gets injured on the property by owning that piece of real estate in your personal name, you could get sued for everything you own. So the correct way to own real estate is in a protective LLC with a very comprehensive and protected operating agreement. If you own the real estate in the protective LLC and somebody sues you, they cannot take the property because you don't own the property. It's owned by the protective LLC.
Right, okay.
Also, if somebody gets injured on the property, they can't sue you because you don't own the property. They can only sue the LLC. So by owning real estate in a protective LLC with a protective and comprehensive operating agreement, not only have you protected the equity in the property in case you get sued, but you've protected yourself from any liability that happens on the property. Now, I want to talk to you about two different clients that came in. I had one set of clients that came in, and they literally had 25 pieces of property that were in their personal name.
Well, now, wait a minute. Now, when you mean personal name, like joint tenants kind of in their name?
Correct. Just husband and wife.
Wow.
Worst thing you could do, because somebody could take the property, and if somebody gets injured on the property, they can sue you as the owner. And all of their properties were big properties. They had hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in equity in each one. So I literally told them that we needed to create 25 different companies for each one of these pieces of real estate, and that's exactly what we did. Now, I just want to contrast that. I had another gentleman come in, and he had 18 properties. Now, the difference here was that his 18 properties were only worth about $30,000 or $40,000 each, as opposed to the other couples who had hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in equity in each property.
Right.
So what I told that person is we need to do a cost-benefit analysis. Of course, the best thing would be to have 18 different companies, but that was not my advice. That's too expensive, too many tax returns, too costly, too timely. What I suggested to him was totally different than what I suggested to the first couple. To him, I suggested, let's create 3 companies. Let's take 6 properties and put them in each one of the companies. Is it the absolute best thing to do? Is it as good as 18 different companies? No. But at least now we've limited each company to 6 properties at plus or minus $30,000 equity each property. That's $180,000. So while the best thing might have been to put each property in a different LLC, it didn't warrant it at that point. So you got to keep it simple. You got to keep it cost effective. You got to understand what you're doing. But look, at the end of the day, you have to realize there's always a cost benefit analysis. And of course, we always want to do whatever we can, to keep our clients' costs down without them losing protection.
I think that's an excellent point that what fits for client A doesn't fit for client B. And that brings me to this question. What does an ideal client look like for your firm, perhaps? Who should be really paying attention and getting in touch with you?
Really everyone. And that might sound weird because a lot of people think, asset protection's only for the wealthy. But really it's the opposite. My smallest client literally has no money, and they actually pay to come in for a consultation because they want to learn what the wealthy people do, so when they do make money, they're protected. And obviously that's an extreme. The other extreme is we have clients that do billions of dollars each year and everything in between. But I always believe that the less you have, the more protection you need. And I'll give you a simple example. Take one of our professional athletes. We represented a lot of NFL and NBA players. Well, take an NFL football player who signs for $50 million.
Okay.
Well, if he's sued for $5 million, he's not going to be happy, but he still has $45 million left. He's going to be okay. Take the average person, the school teacher, someone who inherited some money, someone who saved up maybe $500,000 their entire life for retirement.
Yes.
If they get sued for $1 million, they're wiped out. It's catastrophic. There's absolutely no coming back from it. So I believe that the less you have, the more you need protection, because the more money you have, the more you can afford to lose. I remember a client once who was worth billions of dollars, and he was setting something up in his personal name, and I said, why would you do that? And his response to me was, I could lose $200 million, and it wouldn't even affect my lifestyle. So unfortunately, people think it's just for the wealthy, but it's really the opposite. The less you have, the more you need the protection. But really, everybody needs some sort of asset protection plan. And of course, you're not going to use the same plan for the $200,000 guy as you would for the $10 million guy.
That is such a great point. I've said it many times. There's an analogy that I'm sure that will resonate with you, is that when you're out there and you look around, for example, at a real estate project that someone is building homes, or they're going to build a new apartment building or a new hotel, whatever the project might be, and you ask someone, what is the very first thing that goes up on the project, that before anybody lifts a shovel, what's the first thing that goes up on the project? Most people don't pay attention to it, but it's the rent-a-fence, right?
Of course.
They put up the rent-a-fence. That on any good real estate or construction project, they want to protect the project first so that little Jimmy doesn't fall in the well, right?
Correct. And, nobody expects to get sued. Nobody gets up in the morning and they expects to get in a car accident or expects someone to, drown in their pool or whatever the issue may be. So, again, it all comes back to, being proactive.
It's totally agree that people, again, think we don't have a lot of money and we shouldn't get in touch with Hillel. I mean, do I really need to worry about protecting my assets? But they forget that it's not just assets that people come after. Here in California, for example, I understand that for liability claims, people can sue for a judgment against 30% of someone's income for as much as 10 years.
Yeah, people can go after future income. And also, people always have a lot more than they think they do. A lot of people say, I don't have much. Well, what about the inheritance you're about to get from your mother, your aunt, or your grandmother? What about the money you get every week on your paycheck? What about phone numbers, domains, trademarks, patents? Every time someone comes into my office, the first thing we do is make them inventory what they have. And hands down, every single time, everybody has a lot more than what they thought they did.
Yeah, it is so true because they just forget to put a value on certain things. And then you mentioned, for example, those of us who have kids, you have kids out there. I assume, let's see, do you have kids and wife and family there with you in Florida?
Yeah, I have a wife and my first son on the way.
Wow, congratulations. And so he's not driving a car yet, but you and your wife drive around in cars, and that's a huge liability that most people don't think of.
Let me give you the best information you can ever have if you learn nothing else. Whoever drives the car, that's whose name it should be titled to. If a husband's driving a car, it should be titled in the husband's name and the husband's name only. If the wife's driving a car, it should be titled to the wife's name and the wife's name only. If the child is driving a car, it should be titled to the child's name and the child's name only. Let me explain why. If there's a car accident, there's two people who can be sued, the driver and the owner. Well, if you're driving and you get in a car accident, you're going to be sued as the driver. But there's no reason that your husband or wife should be sued as the owner. Think about it when your child's driving. If he's driving, he could be sued as the driver, but if you own the car, you could be sued as the owner. I had a general contractor come into my office, really nice guy. I unfortunately was not able to help him because it was too late.
Oh.
His son was driving a car that was titled to his name. The son got in the accident, and the person that he hit had, I don't remember, maybe $1 million in medical bills.
Whoa.
Well, the father only had a couple $100,000 in insurance. That father is going to be sued because he owns the car, and he's going to be bankrupt. Even if the insurance pays the full amount, let's call it $200-300, he's got to pay the difference from the $200-300 to the $1 million. So he's wiped out. And consider it also for your business. I don't like cars titled to a business. Why? Because if you're driving your car, you'll be sued as the driver. Why should your business be sued as the owner? You could put your entire business at risk. Keep the car titled to the name of the individual who's driving it. Doesn't mean you can't still take the expense from a tax point of view, as long as you're using it for work purposes, but why give your business the extra liability? Why give your husband or wife the extra liability if you and your kids get in a car accident?
That is so true that especially with business owners who are so tied up in running their business that we business owners, professionals, we miss the holes in the fence. We open up the fence, that around the property, the protection around our family. We don't realize all of those small holes can be extremely risky.
Yep, and it only takes one to lose everything, unfortunately.
No, so true, so true. The piece that I wanted to come back to is that as you look at advice, valuable pieces of advice that you can give out to those who are listening, what you just shared, just titling cars correctly is huge. I have to be honest, it's something that I personally even had not heard from an attorney. I haven't heard from an advisor before. Makes total sense. Are there any other pieces of advice that you might suggest for whether that be business owner, professional, or just husband and wife working towards retirement? What comes to mind for you there?
Sure. Well, the main key, and another one of my quotes I'll tell you, I say it all the time, is own nothing, control everything. People are so worried about ownership, which I think is ridiculous. I want to own absolutely nothing, because if I own something, if something is in my personal name, that means if I'm sued, I can lose it. So if all the listeners actually think right now, what is in their personal name? Real estate, checking, savings, stocks, bonds, brokerage accounts, shares in corporations. If they have anything in their personal name, they can lose it. So I want to own nothing but control everything, because if it's in my name, I can lose it. People are so worried about ownership. And another thing I get them to try and do at my office at the very beginning is stop worrying about who owns something. I don't care who owns it. All I care about is who gets to benefit from it. You might think you own your house, but I can guarantee you that you can't take it with you when you die. So it's really just a long-term lease. The Egyptians tried to take everything with them. I don't think it worked too well. So if you own something, you can lose it. So I want nothing in my personal name and own nothing and control everything.
Oh, that's a great, great way to put it. It really is. That's an outstanding way to put it. The piece that you mentioned when you say ownership, and when you say that, when you reference earlier this idea of risks that people are not paying attention to. There's something actually, again, referencing back to your book, the 401k is a topic that we talk about often. And in financial self-defense, you actually had a section in here that talks about the risks to retirement accounts. You said, and I quote, you said, "Don't assume retirement accounts are protected." Well, have to tell you, almost everybody I could think of, CPAs, other advisors, most people think their 401k is a bulletproof place. But you pointed out an area that I would love to get your input in as it relates to the risks in your with your only having a 401k.
Sure. I'm going to try and give you the few-minute response just because we could talk about that for hours.
Yes.
Let me first preface it by saying that if any of your listeners go to our website, it's www.assetprotectionattorneys.com. On the left-hand side, there's something called financial planning exemptions. And after you hit financial planning exemptions, you can pick any state you want. So certainly pick the state that you live in, whether it's Florida or New York or California. And when you hit that state, it'll tell you what is protected and what is not protected in your state. And one of the things that we talk about is retirement. So if anybody's curious, if the retirement is protected in their state, just go to www.assetprotectionattorneys.com. On the left-hand side, click Financial Planning Exemptions, find your state, and just click on your state. So I'll preface it with that just because every single state is different. But even if your state protects retirement accounts, and this doesn't just go for retirement accounts, this goes for life insurance or annuities or anything else, they're only protected while they remain retirement accounts. So what does that mean? You have $500,000 in your retirement account, and you live in a state like Florida that protects retirement accounts. Well, yes, your retirement account is protected. However, and this is the big caveat, the minute you pull from that retirement account, whether you dilute it, whether you take mandatory distributions, whatever the rationale is, that money now becomes unprotected cash. So while it's great that it's protected as the retirement account, it's really important that you have a protective place to put it once you pull money from that retirement account, if it is protected in your state.
That's an excellent point, that you might think that it's protected, it's hidden away, it's in my IRA, my 401k, and I just keep it in there. Well, the government has built-in rules that says, no, you have to take a certain amount of money out, and if you don't take the money out, the government will take 50% of the penalty anyway. So you're forced to take it out. You better have a plan on where to put it.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you die, it's really unfortunate. I think the last time I checked the stats were that, about 7 out of 10 Americans died, without a will or a trust or a proper estate plan. And it just baffles me because, if one thing in life is guaranteed, it's death. And, unless you want your state telling you where the assets should go, why not put together something so simple? And no difference with the asset protection plan.
No, so true. That the area that caught my attention is that if your company retirement plan is not actually completely compliant, you could have a risk to your retirement plan that's completely out of your control.
Correct. And again, it's tough to talk about only because there's so many different types of retirement plans, and every state is different, and then federal law could be different. But I think the component here, which you're bringing up, is absolutely correct. You need to look into your retirement plans because they may or may not be protected by state law, and they may or may not be categorized correctly, and they may or may not be set up correctly. So a lot goes into whether the retirement is protected.
That's so true. And for those listening, the details and more information, you can find that information, of course, on Hillel's website. All of this is going to be in the show notes, including links to the pages that Hillel just referenced. But you also are going to have an opportunity later here. We'll tell you how to actually get a copy of Hillel's books. And there's a great section in his book, Financial Self-Defense, that talks about that in a bit more detail. So if you're a business owner, or if you work at a company, perhaps even a smaller company that has retirement accounts, it's really important that you pay attention to this section because you may not know that the retirement plan is a source of substantial risk that most employers, most employees don't understand. They don't understand that that's in there. Okay. So as we come towards wrapping up, I want to dig into this area that, a words of wisdom section, if you will. So when you think about, maybe we could break this down as you're looking for somebody who has no planning whatsoever. They look at it and they say, I don't really have anything in place. I've never done anything wrong. Where should they start? What kind of tips and precautions can you give folks as a starting point?
I'll give you kind of my checklist. And the first thing I think that any prospective client, or really anybody, whether they want to do asset protection or not, should do is educate themselves. Because, again, the main problem that I see is that, people don't even find out that there are things they can do to protect themselves until it's too late. So, certainly educate themselves. Our website has a wealth of information. I know that we're going to have a special offer that you'll mention at the end of the show where any of your listeners, I'm happy to give them my book complimentary as long as they mention your show. So the first thing they should do is definitely educate themselves. That's number one. Number two is they need to inventory their wealth. And essentially, like I said, everybody has a lot more than they think they have. What do they currently have? What are they going to have in the future? What are the inheritances? What are the tangible assets? What are the non-tangible assets, et cetera, et cetera? Once you've educated yourself, once you've inventoried what you have, then and only then can you consider creating an actual plan. Until you've educated yourself, until you've inventoried what you have, it doesn't even make sense to think about putting a plan together. But once you do put the plan together, we want to go with the strategy of own nothing, control everything. So the way that the plan should work and the way that the plan should be centered around is that when you're done with that plan, you don't want anything in your personal name. So you want to take all the assets out of your name and put them in some sort of protective entity. So, for example, while a $500,000 brokerage account is not protected when it's in your personal name, if you get sued and you can lose it, why not put that $500,000 out of your name in a protective entity? There's dozens of them. Let's just take a limited partnership, for example.
Right. Okay.
That way, if you get sued, nobody can take the money. So one strategy of getting things out of your name is to put them in some sort of protective entity. Another strategy is to protect with liens. Poverty is power. What's a $100,000 Mercedes worth if you own $95,000? What's a $1 million house worth if you own $950,000? Put liens and mortgages, encumbrances on your property. If you have a house, take out a line of credit. You don't need to pay on it unless you pull, but it still shows up as a mortgage. If you put money into your business for employees or marketing or equipment, why not file a UCC, a loan, a lien, a mortgage, an encumbrance against your business? If your business goes out of business, shouldn't you be the first creditor in line?
No, absolutely. That's a great point.
Another strategy is, invest in exempt assets. Different states have different exempt assets, which just mean types of assets that are protected by state law. And again, those are on the website. If you click on your state, on www.assetprotectionattorneys.com under financial planning exemptions. So, for example, in Florida, your house is protected. Retirement plans are protected. Life insurance is protected. Annuities are protected. Find out what's protected in your state and invest in those assets. So just to recap, anything in your name is unprotected. So after you've educated yourself, after you've inventoried what you have, take assets out of your name. One strategy is put it in a protective entity. Another strategy is protect with liens. Another strategy is to invest in exempt assets. And there's literally hundreds and hundreds of strategies. I'm just trying to give you some of the most popular ones today.
It's outstanding advice. And I have to tell you this, that this is such a perfect quote. I'm going to actually share this. This is out of Hillel's book, that this is actually a client, someone who says, and I quote, "I'm now implementing your strategies." And this is the part that caught my attention. And he continues, "Even my family lawyer was surprised that he could gain so much practical knowledge from your book." That's the key, knowledge, just what Hillel just said. You've got to educate yourself, because it's not an end game that is just for the rich. It isn't. The rules apply to all of us. They may not be the same exact type of planning, but the rules can be applied in almost any situation, right?
100%. And again, not to bemoan things, but I think it's important because you bring up the client's advisors. It is so important. I don't care, if a client's just starting off. I don't care if the client's doing hundreds of millions of dollars a year, but I unfortunately see this with all the clients. None of their financial advisors are talking. Well, your financial advisor needs to talk to your CPA. Your CPA needs to talk to your estate planning attorney. Your estate planning attorney needs to talk to your asset protection attorney. You need what I call a financial self-defense team. And it doesn't behoove the client to have great professionals that don't talk. Because what's a great financial advisor if you have to pay more in taxes? What good is it if you're paying less in taxes if you lose everything to a lawsuit? What good is it if you keep everything if you get sued, but when you pass away, the assets don't go where you want them to go? So I think it's so important that the client make sure that all of their financial professionals are talking. And even if they just appoint one of them, what I'll call a financial quarterback, it doesn't matter who it is, but you got to get everybody on the same page. And I like to do things like that once a quarter, but, challenge yourself and start off by doing it once a year. The couple $100s that you'll pay to each professional will be far outweighed by the thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions you saved by them conglomerating together.
So good advice to actually wrap up today. So now, we've mentioned it throughout. We've touched on it. This is an important offer. Hillel has graciously offered to give away a copy of his book to anyone who registers. We're going to have two different ways that you can sign up, that you can actually get the book, okay? That you can go to assetprotectionattorneys.com. And of course, the link is going to be in the show notes, but it's www.assetprotectionattorneys.com. And you can contact them, reference Personal Pension Radio that you heard this interview, and they'll get your information and send you out a copy of the book. And I would absolutely tell you to spend some time right there. When we talk about education, I have spent so much time on this website. There is just so much information. That's a great place to start to educate yourself. You can also go to personalpensionradio.com/giveaways. personalpensionradio.com/giveaways. We're going to have actually a special page there specifically for Hillel's book and that offer that you can actually sign up for it there as well. Hillel, thank you so much for being here. I'm sure we'd love to actually have you back on the show because there's so many topics that we could dive into deeper, but really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you having me, and I truly hope the information, was educational, valuable, and timely. So it's my pleasure.
No doubt. It's been great having you. We'll talk to you again real soon. Everybody, this has been Personal Pension Radio. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Personal Pension Radio Podcast. If you missed anything during the show, that's okay. We took the notes for you. Check the show notes for links, offers, and a full transcript. And don't forget to head over to personalpensionradio.com and download your free retirement income report. While you're there, we'd appreciate some iTunes love. Please leave us a fantastic rating on iTunes by going to personalpensionradio.com/iTunes. Thanks again for listening.